Welcome to Pathways to Stillness. I'm Dr. Gary Irwin-Kenyon, gerontologist and Tai Chi instructor. On this show, my co-host Vicki Hogarth and I explore how the practice of stillness can transform the way we see aging, death, and loss, and how it can help us understand our lives as a story.
I look forward to joining you on the couch here, Gary, every week. We were talking last week about loneliness, and a conversation we're going to continue on today's show. Where would you like to jump in?
Well, I think last week we talked quite a bit about bringing stillness to loneliness. In other words, just kind of sitting quiet, breathing, and if you feel lonely, just try and kind of let it be there, which just kind of goes along with a lot of what we're talking about in the book.
Should I do, I will reread page 50, which was an exercise we left with the audience last week, which is this. The next time you are lonely, give yourself permission to sit with the experience, even for a short time. At first, it could be just for a few minutes. Tell yourself that you do not need an immediate answer or solution to this feeling. And that is, again, from Gary's book, Pathways to Stillness, that you can find at Indigo Chapters, on his website, Amazon, or at stores like McGuire Chocolate here in St. Andrews. It's our Bible for the show, and I love it. It's a great read. I've reread it a couple times already. But yeah, I did the exercise at home, and it definitely is a struggle for those of us who sometimes like to run away from those type of feelings.
Yeah, it's you're being asked to be with something rather than do something to fix it or control it. So we're using the other part, the being part of our personality or our humanity, our human beingness, rather than doingness. But yes, if we're not familiar with it, and I think even if you do it once in a while, it's not necessarily easy. So you don't need to put a strict time limit on it either. You can allow yourself some flexibility. Maybe it will grow on you as time goes on. There's an interesting way I read this about talking about how loneliness works. And this author was saying it's the difference between relationships you have and those that you desire. So it's not so much that you live alone or don't have any money or various other situations, narrative settings that would cause loneliness, because you might be alone, you might have money, you might not, but you may feel that you're lacking companionship or connection with other people. And that's kind of a general way of perhaps of looking at how loneliness works. And I guess what we're talking about on this show is we're talking to people directly who might be lonely, but we're also talking to care practitioners who are helping, counselors who are helping other people with loneliness. So they may find some of these themes useful as well.
And I think even what you just said there, that sometimes, when you hear from friends who have gone through a divorce or things like that, and I've had friends say to me the loneliest they felt was when they were in a marriage. It just wasn't the person they felt they were supposed to be with anymore, and that can be it. You might not be alone in the these textbook image we have of loneliness. It can come in many forms.
Right, the loneliness of company. That's a really good one to bring up. People stay in relationships and feel that they probably should be alone. And then loneliness can also be seen as a kind of a separateness, that you don't feel like you belong, and so that can be an issue too. Separateness can be because of an illness or a relationship or a job or where you live or gender, race, all those things can make you feel separate and isolated. So what you're hoping to find, I think, in dealing with loneliness is some way of belonging. And we've talked about the 12-step program before, but I find that's an excellent resource for feeling like you belong, because everybody listens to you, doesn't judge you, accepts you, and you can talk if you want. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. And I think that's a big help can be, programs like that can be. I think this show we're doing can be very helpful if you're feeling lonely, just by way of the topics that we're covering that hopefully might resonate with you.
And from feedback we've had from the audience, I think this is actually inspiring more ideas for shows here at CHCO, this idea of taping something week to week so that we can wave to you at home, say hello, and feel like you're a part of the conversation. It really is a special thing to do television in a small community where we know many of your names, your faces, and it really does feel interactive in a really special way, especially as we get into the colder months of the year when you tend to spend more time at home. This is a beautiful way that sort of organically happened, that we are doing something communal despite not being in a big gathering.
Right. Yeah, I thought we could look at some of the ways that you might negotiate loneliness. You mentioned a couple already, but one would be having good virtual connections, right? We say the internet doesn't necessarily relieve loneliness, but there are a lot of really good podcasts, for example, or on YouTube, television shows that follow an amateur guy traveling with his GoPro through different countries. My wife Liz watches quite a bit of these. Or someone's building a house from scratch just with a GoPro. And so those things can be informative, but also make you feel part of real people who are doing things. Mm-hmm. So and the podcasts, of course, lots of spirituality or self-help people out there. So there's a lot of good stuff on the internet, as well as stuff that doesn't really make you feel warm and fuzzy. Right?
Including this show, which is not just on TV, we're on YouTube, we share the episodes on Facebook too, but I think of our own Florence Mitchell here at CHCO. Long before she was in television, she started in high school her own YouTube channel and built a community around her own interests. A lot of times it was fixing vintage electronics.
Yeah.
And it's neat to sort of hear how that evolved over the years from her and a small community she built with people online that maybe have never met in person.
Yeah, so someone could generate that themselves or receive some good stuff from what's already out there. So that's a big one. I think people sometimes don't want to hear this because, people will say, "Oh, you're lonely, join a group." Well, but there's some truth in that. I would say if you explore your story, like we're suggesting here in some of the chapters, then see what kind of interest you have, or if you're older, you may have had interest earlier in life, and you might revisit something. Like one of my favorite characters, he's in the book too, he's a German colleague and good friend of mine who retired as a psychoanalyst and a professor. And he's retired now 10, 15 years. But he wasn't sure what he would do with his time, spent time with his kids and stuff. But one of his friends said, "Willie, you used to play the violin." And he said, "Oh, that's when I was a kid." He said, "No, I remember you were quite serious and you had an idea that you might be a concert violinist." He said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "Why don't you pick up that violin? You still have it." So he just said, okay. So he bought some sheet music and he tried it for a little bit and he kind of liked it. So he played and practiced. And then he found a couple of friends in the same city where he lives, in Freiburg, and they got together and they've got a little string quartet going. And they play locally, pretty well locally. But for him, he said, that's a huge surprise to me in my own life because I never thought I would do that sort of thing. So there's quite a few stories in the book about people who've done different things. One of my former students lived in Fredericton, was a social worker, and he passed away, I think last year or the year before. But he got fed up with social work and he retired, and he said, "I've always liked to cook." So he said, "I think I'll go to the hospitality program at NBCC, St. Andrews, it's in my hometown." So he did that, and one thing led to the other, and he opened a restaurant here. For a few years he had a restaurant going. So you just never know if you're willing to. Yes, you might be lonely, but if you can kind of breathe a little bit with it, do some Tai Chi if it's possible, and then just kind of explore what's out there, maybe on the media, and then see what you can plug into.
I can even say from my personal experience, when I moved home to New Brunswick, it was a challenge at first to deal with loneliness here. I'd been used to being in big cities for my adult life, and I was very active about going out, knowing I was alone. I didn't have family in most of the cities I lived in, going out to make friends. But when I got here, I was feeling a bit broken, and it took a lot for me to get even out of the house some days.
Yeah.
I will say the seniors in Charlotte County were particularly generous, I think, because maybe with their life experience they could recognize when someone seems lonely, and included me in coffees, invited me to events, and that to me for the rest of my life will mean so much. But it was volunteering. I just started volunteering here, and look what that led to. So it is very helpful to just maybe not necessarily know where it will lead, but try it out.
We're being a big psychic there, because I was just about to talk about a little bit about volunteering. That's a huge. They say in Canada that the system would basically break down if we didn't have volunteers. And of course I have a bias for long-term care because I'm a gerontologist. But if you want to, both people who are lonely and looking to talk to somebody, and you who are not lonely but looking for some form of volunteering, it's just, I don't know to describe it, it's almost magical. To me anyway, such a precious gift to connect with older adults. And even if they're frail, which are prejudiced against sometimes, people are prejudiced against sometimes, but they are so appreciative. I think it's because they've experienced so many losses, that we could say their life plot is very thin because of the losses they've had and the suffering they've had. So I find when I go there to do my seated Tai Chi class, for example, that it's almost like they're there. They're with me. They're not, we say a lot of 30-year-olds or 50-year-olds or 60-year-olds distracted by all the, things they have to do in life. Well, these folks don't have a lot of that going on. So I find if you're with them and make them feel that you're just an equal. You're not there to get some expert to show them something or pity them. You just give them the feeling that you're with them, you're one of them. And it's just so rewarding. So I would strongly recommend that any form of volunteering that you might be interested in.
It is life-changing. Not just for the people that you help, but for yourself as you do it. I know there's a line that I love reading in this book, and I think it speaks to some of the people you were just mentioning when you have had a lot of loss in your life. And I think the older I get too, I realize that comes with with sadness, with loneliness, but it also brings at times a lot of wisdom too. And there's one line in your book that I read a lot, and I have it underlined. It was right before the last exercise on 49. It says, "The journey of life is more about letting go and falling away than gaining and achieving." So I also think that with that loneliness, they hold a lot of wisdom too, in what the path of life becomes. And as I get into the second half of my life, the deeper I go, the more this rings true, and the more you try to think about life on bigger terms and what it's really all about.
Yes, and the loneliness and the loss can give birth to more stillness. That's those folks I'm talking about and what you're saying. It's almost like there's not so much other stuff there, so they're open to stillness. I've mentioned Father Richard Rohr, and he's a Franciscan priest who wrote a book called Falling Upward. And that's what he's talking about, that the first half of life is achieving, gaining, accomplishing, degrees and jobs and family and all that stuff. And he says the second half of life, which other philosophers have talked about too, the second half of life is about losing health, partners, friends, jobs. It's more about, eventually more about losing, but the more you lose, the more you gain in stillness and peace and kindness and compassion for other people. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty good deal, even if the losing is not always fun. But I mean, that's the whole ground of Buddhism, right? That life is suffering because we attach ourselves too much to things or people or anything. And when we attach ourselves too much, we suffer. But if we can find a way to kind of let that go, keep the river moving rather than fighting against it, then things might work out. Folks in that tradition and Christians like him, like Richard Rohr, would say that's exactly why we're here on earth. You know, our karma, we're here to have this story, be this story of growing and learning and then letting go and dying, but hopefully dying with some wisdom and peace and love in our hearts. Mm-hmm. It sounds like a pretty good direction. Yeah,
and nevertheless, it offers us challenges, but sometimes those challenges can be daunting. I know I have a lot of anticipatory loneliness, if that makes sense. I fear the day I will lose my parents, people I love, and even though I'm not experiencing the loneliness currently, sometimes that's in the back of my head. I look to people who've gone through that for strength, because I don't know how I will get through that. That's something in the future I know will be a struggle. And when I see people who've gone through it, I can only admire when they're able to put it in perspective, yeah. to make it still feel like it's all meaningful and to find comfort in the memories.
Yeah, I agree. I have several friends, close friends, who are getting more and more frail through dementia or through physical, and well, the Buddhists say too, look on your shoulder. You know, for death should be on your shoulder all the time. We may talk more about that too sometime, but not being aware of those things can just create more pain for ourselves. But it's not easy because I'm experiencing that. I'm an older adult, but I'm not 95. I'm 76, and a number of my closer people I've known for a long time, so they're part of my story, my life story, a meaningful part. So there's a little bit of an emptiness and sadness for sure. Maybe I hope I'm also looking at it in a positive way, a growth way, but there is a sadness and oh no, not them too, mm-hmm. And but I do believe it's all for the good. It's just that some days, right? We're only human, so.
It's looking to find the ways that they're still with us, but when it's so immediate, that initial void can just feel so overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think it's true for ourselves and for our relationships, that we human beings connect with each other through vulnerability, and through suffering, and through, we could call it weakness rather than strength or aggression. That's how we connect as human beings. And it can be so simple. If you're, I think you mentioned before about loneliness and recognizing somebody who's lonely. So when I go in the grocery store, I know I've mentioned this before too, some of these themes are worth reinforcing. When I go in the grocery store or any of the stores, I just really try to take a moment, to take a breath, and have an eye-to-eye contact with that person. And a lot of times the grocery store here, I don't know if they're trained this way, but they're all very good at this. And so whether they're lonely or not, but certainly if I am, and you get that just for seconds, you don't even need words, but how are you today? But it's just that I see you and you see me. And that can, I've had older adults tell me it almost makes my day just to have a few contacts like that in the day.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind also, we can think about our own loneliness, but to also be aware of what we put into the universe and how it affects others. It could be, I think it's a Mr. Rogers quote, where you don't know how much it means just to acknowledge someone, to say something, and acknowledge who they are as a person can mean the world to someone on a day where maybe you won't pass your mind again, but to them, there's people I've met and I've held on to these moments and they have no idea the impact they've made.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
As we get closer to the end of the show, tell us a little bit about what you would like the takeaway for people to be today. We still have about 5 minutes or so.
Well, I think it'd be almost like a review on the one hand, to try and think about stillness practice of some kind. If you're developing or discovering a stillness practice, it can be formal one like meditation or prayer or Tai Chi, or many other kinds of practice that just are good for you to get quiet or to get away from the rush of your head or the rush of the world. And then to just, maybe we've got a bit of a list here. You might think of, well, this doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not interested in this. But maybe this, they're just, even if you happen to be on Facebook and you just do some exploring there, and you see all kinds of things, or YouTube, all kinds of things people are doing. And you might see something that, I've always thought about this, maybe I could, I think I used this example before. I had a friend whose wife passed away a while ago, and so I gave him my book, and I said, you might find this helpful in your loneliness, and you might not. So I gave him it. About a week later, he said, the French-Canadian guy, he said, Gary, looks very interesting, but I don't read books like this. He said, I read books like how to build an engine or how to fix a motor or a bread oven. He was a baker too, so he said, that's what I do. I said, oh, that's okay. You just pass the book on or whatever. And then a couple of weeks later than that, he came up to me, he said, Gary, he said, I was thinking about this stillness business. And he said, when I get on my e-bike and I go over to Minister's Island and I crank it up and I just go, 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 he said, I don't think of anything. I'm very quiet inside. He said, is that stillness? I said, it is, whatever. So we can have the standard ways that are, practices that have proven themselves sometimes thousands of years. So they do work. But there could be that and a combination of some very creative things that work. And so you don't need to feel you need to be, that's the other part of this, you don't need to feel that you have to become an expert or know everything about it or run some kind of operation. No, it's just sitting down with, maybe you're a painter, a writer, theater person, any kind of creative activity. Lots of wonderful things happen right here that are just help people to chill out a bit.
Well, I hope that we have been, in a way, that friend to people at home. I know I look forward to this every week because it's a chance to just be vulnerable, to be open, to talk about subjects that can be hard to take on when you're just passing in a coffee shop. But we really get down to what matters here and how we really feel. And it's a beautiful feeling to be able to share that, not just with you, but with everyone at home, and to have them share that back with us. How would you like, what Tai Chi move should we end with today?
Oh, let's try the single whip. So for that one, you have one hand out about 45 degrees, like a push, and the other hand's 45 the other way with your thumb and your big finger, and you drop your wrist. So one's out one side. And then you, as with some of them, you just try to relax, let your shoulders, you're correct, you have some extension here, but it's not locked and it's not way back here, just kind of in between. and you just feel like you're floating. Let go of the energy in there and look at your fingertips. So feel like your arms are floating. This may take some practice, but the idea is to get in the position and then relax. Now we're going to change. So this is what we call the beak hand, chicken beak hand. There's a more fancier Tai Chi name, but this helps too. So from here you just sink your elbow and go put that hand into the push, and then this one drops into the beak hand with the thumb and the big finger and the wrist dropped, and then just looking at your fingertips. Let's do one more. So drop your wrist, drop your elbow, sorry, and flip it up, and then the thumb and the finger, and just looking at your fingers. I'm Canadian, I say sorry all the time. Looking out at the fingers. Yeah, and then you just relax. So this one, I would suggest, don't do it for too long at first, because it's really working a lot of muscles and ligaments and everything all up in here. So if you do it a little bit and change a couple of times, you'll gradually feel more relaxed, and you might want to stay there longer. And of course the idea is that once you're more relaxed, the chi starts to flow all the way through your arms and through your head and everything. So that's the ultimate idea of it is, yeah, that's it.
Well, I hope everyone tries that at home, and if you'd like to share any of your experiences with us about what you're taking away from the show, from the Tai Chi to the exercises, we always love to hear from you. You can reach us on Facebook or just email stillness@chco.tv. Well, Gary, it was a pleasure to sit down with you again today, and I always look forward to it. It's one of the highlights of my week.
Well, it's one of the highlights of my week too, and I hope you'll all join us next time for Pathways to Stillness.